Life is put on hold, and all our plans have canceled. Things have changed. Nothing feels the same. Disappointments, fear, and doubt go hand in hand, and waves of worry threaten me. Everywhere uncertainty. But in the midst of chaos, in the midst of all fear, there is something to remember. Yes, there is something we all need to hear. Joy is not canceled. Peace still remains. God's goodness, kindness, His grace isn't running low, and He has not changed. His power is still abundant. His mercies are still new. God's plans have not been canceled. He is still in control, and everything that matters still remains. So when the trials and tests they come, and darkness only hides the sun, and you can't seem to find your way, no light of day, there are some things we know for sure. They never change, they will endure, no matter what things look like all around us. So in the midst of chaos, in the midst of all fears, there is something you should remember. Yes, there is something we all need to hear. Joy is not canceled. Peace still remains. God's goodness, kindness, His grace isn't running low, and He has not changed. His power is still abundant. His promises, they're all still new. God's plans have not been canceled. He's fully in control, and everything that matters still remains. Yes, everything that matters still remains.
Well, the series that we've been going through, whenever I get a chance, is plot twists, and been going through different plot twists that are found within the pages of the Bible. And one thing I love about the Bible is that as you go through it, there are so many things that will catch you off guard. Now, we have, those of us that have been raised in church, maybe you went to Sunday school and now you've been in church for a number of years, it's easy for us to read it and just be like, oh, I know how this story ends. But just kind of taking yourself back through the pages of the Bible and reminding yourself, man, what if this was the first time I read this? Would I expect this end? And so many times with the stories of the Bible, we do not expect this end. We do not expect the end that comes. We do not expect the different twists and turns that show up during this journey. And if you saw the notification I sent out over Realm, trying to give you a little bit of an idea of what today's service would be like, we're going to be talking about faithfulness through the craziness, faithfulness through the craziness. And I want to just share some biblical principles that are found in the book of Esther and some of the lives of the characters that are there. And, the thing I love about principles in the Bible, we can go through and we can pull out a lot of points from the Bible, but a principle is something, in my opinion, that transcends. It's something that no matter what the story is, and no matter how it applied to them, there is a principle that we can find that can be applied to different people, to all of us, even in our time now. We can take it and we can say, you know what? What was the principle there that was found in that passage? Maybe it's just that God is good. A principle that God is good at all times. And we find that throughout the stories that are written in God's Word. And so today we're going to just kind of pull out and talk about some of the principles found in this book. Now, I also mentioned in my little bit of a preview that life is like a coloring book, a child's coloring book. Have you ever gone out and opened up a child's coloring book? We've got quite a few of them at our house. They are considered pieces of art at our house, very valuable. Eric and I would be willing to slide them over to our friendly trash can. But Paisley, on the other hand, finds each stack of coloring books to be very, very important. And so we've got all these coloring books, and if you open them up, you find all kinds of craziness. You look at it, the sky is green, the grass is purple, the sun is blue. If you even closely think you're going to have a picture where the colors are between the lines, you have lost your mind. Matter of fact, if it even comes close to being colored within the lines, I'm probably the one that colored it, But when you look at that, so often life feels like that to me. I just feel like my life is a child's coloring book sometimes. And sometimes it feels like, if I could just be honest, sometimes life feels like there is a child holding me and just going to work, right? Like just making things happen, everything. Ooh, hey. Change the mic, is that what I need to do? Get the black one? It's all right, I didn't like the red on this mic anyway. All right, so now I sound like Brother Lynn. This is going to be great. When a child's coloring, but when we talk about this, we talk about some of the different things that are going on in our lives, and we try to break down. Listen, what is happening? God, why is this happening? If I can just be honest, sometimes I feel like everything is just out of control. It feels like maybe there's a child controlling my life. And I ask the question sometimes, God, what are you doing? And sometimes I ask the question, God, why are you doing it? Where are we going? What's the plan? Is there a plan? I don't know if you've ever felt like that. Like maybe your days are just running together, bound only by the craziness. All your days just seem to run together. They are only bound by the anxiety, the fear, the dread that they share, right? You been there? And as I think about this, I think about everything. If I'm just juggling life and juggling all these different things, and it feels like I can't let anything drop. And sometimes I feel like I'm just about to fall out. And that's a term that we use sometimes, falling out. We talk about that when, if you're super tired, right? If you're tired and you're falling asleep, I'm about to fall out. Or if you're arguing with somebody, you had a fight with somebody. What did y'all have? You had a falling out, right? You're not talking anymore. You're angry with each other. We use that term, falling out. Me and Erica, we like to go on golf cart rides. At the end of the day, some of our neighbors, we have a South Point community over in our neighborhood, and so they laugh, they see us riding around, and we will go out at the end of the day, and just one of our favorite things to do is give the kids all their vitamins, including their melatonin, right before we get on the golf cart. And we put them on the golf cart, and it's kind of the cool of the day. Things are calming down, and we might have a little bit of music playing softly, and just trying. It's a plot. It is. It's just trying to get them to go to sleep, you know. And we're very safe and responsible parents. We have a tow strap in the back of the golf cart that wraps around them and keeps them locked in place. So that's good. And we were driving down the road the other day. We were just doing laps around our neighborhood. And I look back, and Lincoln is sitting there, and he's doing and you knew he's going, and he's doing that little sleepy spin, you know. And I nudge Erica, and I said, hey, and she looks back and she laughs. She throws her arm back and she wraps her arm around him, and she says, "Boy, don't fall out, don't fall out." Wraps her arm and pulls him in close. And I thought to myself as we were riding down the road, don't fall out, lean in. Don't fall out, lean in. And that's really what I want to give you today. I want you to hold on to this thought. Don't fall out, lean in. Because we're talking about craziness. We're talking about faithfulness through the craziness, right? So we're focusing on the craziness of life. And sometimes life makes us feel like we are going to fall out, right? Everything seems to be pushing us away. Everything seems to be driving us away. And you know what? It's very easy for us to sit here and to be like, you know, okay, Jake, lean in. What do you mean? We get that concept, though. Think about it. When you're driving down the road and you realize, oh, I'm coming up on my turn, and maybe it was last second, so you hit the brakes and you kind of go into the turn, and you're maybe taking that turn a little faster than you should, and everything in the car, right? The coffee cup goes flying. You ever been there? Coffee cup goes flying. The cell phone goes flying. The papers go flying. Everything goes flying except you. Because you have this natural understanding now that you are wise. You have this understanding of what? When you take the turn, you lean in. You lean in. You don't even think about it. Sometimes you don't even realize you're doing it. But you lean in to the turn. And so today, as we talk about faithfulness through the craziness, I want us to think on and keep our minds going back to this idea of leaning in. Just like the coffee cup won't lean in, will it? The cell phone won't lean in, will it? The papers, they don't lean in, do they? No, if you don't control them, they go flying everywhere. But you have enough sense to lean in to the turn. And when life is full of twists and turns, why is it so often instead of leaning in, we are willing to fall out? Everything's trying to push us away, and yet we don't do what is only natural when you're driving down the road. I've known so many people who fell out of their faith, fell out of their marriage, fell out of work, fell out of their just everything. People fall out all the time because things get hectic, things get crazy. And instead of leaning in, they fall out. In the book of Esther, we're going to see some living examples of faithfulness through the craziness. We see people who fall out when life gets crazy, but we also see people who decide to lean in. And so I want to start by just kind of introducing you to some of the main characters in this book and giving a summary of the book. Now, I don't get to hold this pulpit at all times. So what I'm going to do is just give you kind of an overview of the book. We're going to run through an overview of the book and some of the things that happened, the events that happened in the book. And then we're going to pull out some principles that can apply to us from this, okay? So just kind of thinking about some of the characters in the book. First of all, we come to King Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. This king, also known as Xerxes the first, he was king of the Persian Empire. He was ruler of this great world power, right? And you can read the book for yourself, but he was looking for a new wife. His first wife didn't work out, okay? And so he's got her out of the picture, and he's looking for a new bride, looking for a new queen, and sends his men out looking for all the beautiful young women in his kingdom. They go out and they start finding all these women. They're bringing them back. It's like The Bachelor, ancient Persia, edition. bringing them in. They're candidating, and all this stuff. And we are introduced to this young lady, Esther. Now, Esther, she's a very special girl. But her parents died while she was young. And she was being raised by her cousin, Mordecai. She'd been raised by him since she was a child. And Mordecai treated her like she was his own daughter. He loved her, right? Now, Esther, as she's there going through this process and she's eventually chosen to become his new wife. And that sounds great. It sounds like a great opportunity. Wow, this young girl is now a queen. But if you knew the story of what happened to the other queen, that may not sound like such a great opportunity. The guy was kind of a pig, to be honest with you. The guy was kind of a bad dude. And some movies and things portray him to be this nice guy that was in love with the queen. And I don't really buy that very much. I don't know. Maybe God changed his heart a little bit, but I don't buy that so much. I feel like he was kind of a jerk, to be honest with you. And he didn't really love his first wife, and she was disrespectful at a moment when she should have been disrespectful. And he, in this drunken rage, decided he's going to get rid of her. And we say, oh, what an honor it is for Esther to be queen. No. Terrifying, honestly. Terrifying. She's here with this man of low integrity, a king who probably saw himself more as God than anything, and so he was not going to encourage her to pursue God, not going to allow her to really worship the God she wants to worship. And after all this, the Persians had taken over as this world power, and the Jews, they were in the Babylonian exile and all these things, but some of them now were released and were able to go back. And but here we find Esther and Mordecai, these young Jewish people that were still trapped in Persia, still here. And this, for Mordecai, he saw this probably, although he understood that God was up to something. At the same time, have you ever been there where up here, God is up to something? God's got control. But knowing God has control of a situation does not seem to eliminate the practical fear that you have, right? It doesn't always take that away. And I imagine Mordecai is sitting there in some fear of what this relationship is going to look like for his beloved daughter, his adopted daughter. We've already mentioned Mordecai, but to kind of focus in on him, he was a faithful servant of God. He was not afraid to stand up for his faith. He was not afraid to stand up even when it contradicted the laws of the land. He would stand for his faith rather than being obedient to the laws. He loved his daughter, his adopted daughter, but he knew God was up to something in all of this. And he was faithful to God. He even stopped, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but he even stopped a plot to kill the king. He intervened in a situation like that. But our final character is Haman. Haman, he was a wicked man, a prideful man, and he would do anything to move ahead. He would do anything, and that's actually what happened. He began to be promoted and move ahead in the kingdom. And as he was promoted, his pride only built greater and greater. He was a smooth talker. The king liked him. He became eventually like second to the king, basically. One day, as Haman was walking through the king's gates, everyone had been commanded by the king to bow. When Haman came by, everybody was required to bow to him. Mordecai refused to do it. Mordecai would not bow. And this made Haman very upset, very, very mad. Now, this wasn't like, when they did this, this wasn't like one of those things where it was just, oh, hey, how you doing? This was like, they were like worshiping. It was very close to deifying a man. And Mordecai refused to do that. And day after day, when Haman would walk by, Mordecai would refuse. And they would ask him, why aren't you bowing? And he would say, I'm a Jew, I do not do that. I'm not bowing to this man like he's a god. Mordecai was faithful to God. He was faithful through all this craziness. Haman, as he saw that, as he saw what was happening, he was filled with rage, with anger. So much so that he convinced the king that there were these awful people in the land. Awful people that would not obey the laws of the land. They were mean, they were wicked people. And that something needed to be done about them. And so the king agreed and said, okay, do what you need to do. And Haman went out and sent out a decree that all of the Jews throughout all the province would be killed on a particular day. He sends out this decree. Well, Mordecai had told Esther, do not tell anybody that you're a Jew. So when she went there, they had no idea that she was Jewish because the people of the land already hated the Jews. They were at odds anyways. And now Mordecai is so angry, or Haman is so angry with Mordecai that not only does he want Mordecai dead, but he wants all of his people dead too. And that's where we pick up here in chapter 4, is this thing has been sent out to all the people. And now they know that this is what they're facing. They know that their deadline is coming. They are going to be killed on this particular day. And that's what they're facing. And they're filled with anxiety. The Bible says, I think it's the end of chapter 3, it says that they were perplexed, confused. They didn't know what was going on. You ever been there? You ever, God, what in the world is happening? And Mordecai here, he is faithful through the craziness. He displays faithfulness through the craziness. How? Because when everything was pushing him away, and other people may have fallen away, he decided to lean in. And I want that for us. I want to display faithfulness through the craziness of my life. I want you to be able to display faithfulness through the craziness. I think that's something, there's enough craziness in the world today. We've got enough people falling away because of the craziness. You know what we need? We need people who would be faithful through it. That no matter what's going on, I'm going to stay faithful. When things are taking a wild turn, I'm going to lean into my marriage. I'm going to lean into my work. I'm going to lean into the craziness of church. I'm going to lean in to my faith. But why? Why? So before we move on, don't fall out. Lean in. Why do we do that? Why should I care? Why should I lean in? Why should I care to be faithful when it seems like God has forsaken me? When it seems everything else is falling apart? When the easy thing for sure would be to walk away, to fall away. Why lean in when everything seems lost? First of all, God sees through flattery, but smiles on faithfulness. God sees through flattery, but smiles on faithfulness. You see, Haman was a man of flattery. He was a smooth talker. He had everyone on his side. The king liked him. The people liked him. Haman was a man of flattery. He knew how to move ahead in the kingdom. Mordecai was not a man of flattery. Mordecai didn't care about flattering the king. He didn't care about flattering Haman. No. He was going to be faithful to his God. And so as we look at this, I think about Mordecai, and it would have been easy, right, for Mordecai to have been rooting for somebody for the death of the king that took his daughter. It would have been easy for Mordecai to be rooting for the death of a king that opposed God's people. It would have been easy for that. And so when he heard about this plot to kill the king, he was the only one that heard it. It would have been easy for him to just kind of stay out of it, right? Just let whatever God decides to happen will happen, right? It would have been easy to walk away. But Mordecai decided to do something different. He took this news, when he heard about this, he took it to Esther and reported it to Esther and had Esther report it to the king. And they researched the situation. They found out what was going on, and they captured the men, and they killed the men that were going to kill the king. Mordecai, who could have very easily rooted for the king to die, decided to stand up for the king. Why? I think it was a form of faithfulness to God. I think that's what it was. He wasn't going to sit back and allow these people to kill a king that God had set there. God had placed over authority in that place. He wasn't going to sit back and watch that. He knew it wasn't right. And so as much as he didn't like the king, he was going to step up for the situation. And what's crazy is that you would think he would at least get a thank you, but it didn't happen. They didn't even say thank you. They found it out. Okay, write it down in the books and let's move on. And then as I thought on this and continued to dwell on this and think over this, Haman was promoted during this time. Haman didn't do a thing but flatter him. Mordecai saved his life and didn't get a thank you. Haman sat there and just kind of puffed him up and said how nice he was and how good the kingdom is and all this stuff, and now he's promoted. Are you kidding me? But doesn't that seem like life sometimes? Like, take that, now think about that for a second. You've been faithful, you do your job, you do it right, you do it well, you do what you're supposed to do, you do all the things that God's been telling you to do, and all of a sudden, you're the one that's in trouble at work for some reason, and these other people that just sit around and do nothing, right? Because that's our perspective sometimes. These other people that aren't doing a thing, they're the ones that are getting promotions. Peter acknowledged this, but he also gave encouragement. He said, servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the froward. For this is thankworthy if a man for conscience toward God endure grief, suffering wrongfully. For what glory is it, if when you be buffeted for your faults, you shall take it patiently? But if when you do well and you suffer for it, and then you take that patiently, this is acceptable with God. He continues on to explain that this is the example that Jesus set for us. Jesus set that example for us. God sees through flattery, but smiles on faithfulness. Don't get caught up in flattering other people. Be faithful to God. Mordecai was a faithful servant. His goal was to remain faithful. And so what did he do? He leaned in. I feel like there are people today that are ready to fall out. We need to lean in. We got to lean in. Why? Not only because God sees through the flattery and smiles on faithfulness, but secondly, God rejects the prideful heart but honors the humble servant. After Haman was promoted, when he would walk past people, they would bow to him. But, Mordecai, he refused, right? And Haman, his pride, it made him so angry. Haman loved the praise of men. He wanted to be honored in front of everyone. And so he loved this. And when Mordecai refused to do this, Haman was so angry that he wouldn't bow, that he was ready to wipe out the entire people of Mordecai. Kill them all. Pride will drive you to do some pretty crazy things. See, here's the thing. You say you would never do something like that. I understand, right? See, none of us would ever do something like that because none of us have the power to do something like that. Haman was second in command of the world power. He could do whatever he wanted. He had the authority of the king and the blessing of the king in this. See, his pride mixed with his power created something quite destructive, right? See, pride will cause us to do things. It'll drive some awful things. It drives wedges between families. It splits churches. Pride creates war. No wonder God said that pride is one of the things that he hates most. It led to Lucifer's fall, to Eve taking the fruit. Pride has been the downfall of many great people, of many great nations, of many great movements. And as prideful as Haman was, Mordecai was the total opposite. He refused to bow, but it wasn't because he was too proud to bow. It was because he saw that this was a form of worship, and he refused to worship Haman and the king. He wanted to stay faithful to God But in this, what we see also, when Mordecai tears his clothes, he tears his clothes, and everybody else is going around weeping and wailing, but he tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth. He had ashes on him, and he went out in public. He went out in public for others to see it. Esther hears about this, and she sends some clothes to him. She doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know about the decree. So she sends this out to him. And this is what happens. When she sends these clothes out to him, get him clothed. Get him to put together. Then Mordecai, he says, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. He chooses to stay in that place of humility. Why? Because he knew that God rejects the proud, but honors the humble. He needed God's help during this time. They needed God during this time. He didn't need Esther. He didn't need the king. He needed God. And so he chose to stay in a place of brokenness before God, setting that example in front of the other people. Too often, pride keeps us from calling out to God. Does it not? Too often, pride will keep us from trusting in God. Too often, pride will keep us trying to work things out on our own, trying to make things happen on our own. Pride. See, we're too civilized for brokenness, and that's the problem. We're too civilized for it. It can't be broken. We want other people to think we have it all together, and in turn, those people want us to think that they have it all together, but in reality, all of us are suffering in silence. Right? The struggle. I mean, Mordecai, though, he's humble. James wrote, but he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And he continues on, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. So don't fall out, lean in. Why? Because God rejects the prideful heart, but honors the humble servant. And then this third thing, God defends his people, even when his people do not see it. One commentator wrote about the book of Esther, he said, God is not even mentioned once by name in the book. Not even once. But the book of Esther clearly shows us that even when God is most hidden, he is still working to protect his chosen people. When God is most hidden, he is still working to protect his chosen people. Mordecai didn't really know what he could do in this moment. He didn't really know on a practical level, other than just calling out to God, he didn't know what was going to happen next. So when Esther sends out these clothes, he says, I don't want them. So she sends another servant out. What is going on? And he starts to explain. He has them take the decree to her, and so that this is the first time she reads and sees what the decree is. And he says, you need to go talk to the king. You need to go talk to the king. And as he says this, you need to go talk to the king, she explains to him, listen, I can't. If I go to the king when I haven't been called, I could be put to death. That's a part of their law. Like, I could actually be killed for going to the king without him calling me. Mordecai explains something to her. Look with me at Esther chapter 4 and verse number 13. This is a passage you're probably familiar with. Very famous words from Mordecai. In verse 13 it says, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. In other words, don't think that just because you're living in the king's house that when this decree goes out that you'll be spared. Don't think that. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, if you keep quiet at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He's saying, Esther, I know you're scared. I know you're afraid, but listen to me. You cannot think for 1 second that just because you're right now in a safe place, that if you betray God's people, if you turn your back right now, don't think that you will be left safe. God is going to defend his people. God is going to step in and defend them regardless. And he said, so you have the opportunity to be a part of it, or you have an opportunity to be left out, left out of not only the deliverance, but also God's obedience to God. As we think on these words and look at this, Mordecai realized that God had placed her here for a purpose. See, what if everything that we've been going through, Esther, what if everything that has happened right now has been leading up to this moment? God knew that we needed you here at this moment. What if God put you here for this very thing? I'm not sure what distress you're facing, what you're going through, what is happening. But if you're a follower of God, I can promise you that God is in control of your situation. The struggle might actually be intended as a part of growth for you, as redirection or maybe even correction, but He's in control. And before we close, I want to give you a couple things here that kind of go along with this, that God defends His people. I want you to notice something here with God's sovereignty, that while God is sovereign, meaning He is in control, that does not negate our responsibility in the matters at hand. God doesn't always make you lean in. Sometimes you got to choose to lean in. So as we talk about this, that God defends His people, I want you to notice these two things. And keep in mind, so far we've talked about why you should lean in, but this is where you're going to learn, how do I really lean in? What does that look like to actually lean in? So as we close, first of all, I want you to wait patiently for God. Wait patiently for God. You see, God works favorably for those who wait patiently. God works in favor of those who will wait on Him. Think of the events that had led up to this point. Mordecai had been living in captivity with his people. Some had gone home, but he is still stranded in this land. Where is God? Now they're facing complete annihilation. What is God doing? Esther's parents both died when she was young. She had to move in with Mordecai. Where was God in the midst of this tragedy? Now she's been taken from her home with Mordecai and placed in the house of a king who is a wicked man, who just because when he got drunk, he didn't like how she responded to him. He had her removed. Where is God? God, why are you doing this? And how can we claim that God is at work in the midst of something like this? What's crazy is everything that seemed like a tragedy, everything that was a tragedy, everything that seemed like it was falling apart was actually a part of the plan. Amen. To get them in the right place, to get them to the right point where they needed to be. And I don't know what difficulty you're facing today, but it could be a part of God's plan for deliverance later. In Romans chapter 8, we find statements like, in verse number 1, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. In verse 15, it says, you have received the spirit of adoption whereby we cry, Abba, Father. In verse 18, it says, the suffering of this present time, they are not worthy to be compared with the glory with which we shall be revealed in us. In verse 26, he says, likewise, the Spirit helpeth our infirmities. In verse 28, he says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. In verses 29 and 30, we see God's plan for salvation and sanctification. But then Paul asked the question, what shall we say to these things? All of these promises that have just built up, all of these things that I just laid out to you, what do we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? Church, that's for you. Those promises are for you. And Paul's conclusion was, if God is for us, then who can actually stand against us? God defends His people, even when they don't see it. But His people got to wait. And we got to wait patiently. Everything might be trying to push you out of the golf cart. Lean in. Everything at work, the stresses at work, might be trying to push you to throw in the towel and quit. Lean in. The things in your marriage, the finances, the struggles, the heartache there, maybe trying to push you out of your marriage, lean in. Things going on, all these things building up, and they make you want to fall out of your faith, lean in. We got to lean in. Picking back up in our story, Esther goes to see the king. Although he could have had her killed, he chose to let her come in and speak with him. And he asked her what could he do. And she invites him and Haman to this party. She's going to throw for them. And then she says, at the party, I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you about what I need at the party. He says, okay. So they come, and there's like a couple parties that she throws for them. And it's this whole thing. And she keeps building it up. Come to another party. And then when you come to that party, I'm going to tell you what I really need. Okay, let's go to the party. Haman is so excited that he has been invited. He goes home bragging, I was invited to a party. Esther, the queen, is throwing a party, and she has only invited me and the king. Look at me. How great am I? Even the queen recognizes how great I am. He starts, and as he's going home to tell the people about this, tell his family about this, he sees Mordecai as he's passing by, and he's filled with anger again, the root of bitterness, I tell you. He's filled with anger all over again. And he gets there to him, and he says, I can't even rejoice. I can't even be excited about the party because of the sight of Mordecai. And so what they say, hey, well, let's do this. You know what you should do? You should build some gallows. You should build something, and we'll hang him on them. These giant gallows. So he says, you know what? That's a great idea. We're going to put Mordecai to death. Build the gallows. And they go out, and they start building these gallows. That night, the king couldn't sleep. You know, I wrote this kind of in parentheses. This is just for you. When you can't sleep at night, pay attention. Pay attention. When there, you know, it might just be the pizza you ate. I'm not saying that it's always God. But at least give it a second thought. When you can't sleep at night, there might be something God's trying to talk to. He's trying to get your attention about something. I can tell you, there have been times where I've just laid awake thinking about people. Thinking about people in the youth group, people in this church, people just think, and God, how can I pray for them? And just pray for them. And then to find out later that they were going through something. There have been moments where people have called me during the week and said, hey man, I could not get any sleep last night. I've been thinking about you for whatever reason. What's going on? And I would be in the middle of something. See, God does that. Well, God was trying to get the king's attention here. He's trying to talk to the king about something, and the king gets up and he starts reading history books because that puts anybody to sleep. So he starts reading these history books, and he saw that Mordecai had saved his life, and so he goes and he asks his servant. He says, "Hey, this guy that saved my life, did we do anything for him? Did we say it? Did I say thank you? You know?" And they said, "No, there was nothing done for him." And he said, "Hey, there's somebody outside. Who is that?" And they said, "It's Haman." Okay, bring Haman in here, as one of his advisors. Bring Haman in here. Haman comes in, and he says, Haman, there's somebody that I, the king, I'm very delighted in this person. And I want to know, what would be the best way for me to just show my love for this person? To just show how happy I am about this person and what they've done. And Haman, thinking that the king is talking about himself, right? Because he's so prideful. He's thinking the king is talking about himself. Haman says, well, you know what you should do? You should take one of your royal garbs. You should put it on the king. You should put a crown on his head and have one of your most trusted servants walk him through the city. Have one of us walk him through the city on horseback, proclaiming, this is what happens to those that the king delights in. And the king says, that is a great idea. Go get my robe and put it on Mordecai. And I want you to walk him through the city proclaiming it. And I'm sure Haman just wanted to fall out in that moment. Haman is like, what? And Haman, the man that he hates most, had to take and dress up Mordecai, put him on horseback, and go out proclaiming his glory over his own. How crazy is that? But when you think about this, when I think about what all is happening here, Haman, he goes home and he's broken. He's so angry. He's just mortified through it all. And he went home weeping. And his friends tell him this. In chapter 6 and verse 13, if Mordecai be the seed of the Jews, thou shalt not prevail against him, but surely fall before him. They had no idea what was about to happen. Haman realizes, what I got to do. I got to get out of here. I've got to go. I'm running late. And so he takes off, and he's heading to this party. And as he gets to the party, they're at this banquet, and he's sitting there with Esther and the king starts asking her, Esther, why are we here? What can I do for you? Esther, you risked your life to just come in and talk to me. There is something big going on you need to talk about. What is it? You can tell me. He's trying to get it out of. And finally she speaks up. And she starts to explain to him that there was a plot to kill her and all of her people. And he says, what are you talking about? Who is it that's trying to kill you? And she says, listen, I am a Jew. And this is the first time she's revealed this. And I'm sure Haman, everything in him just sunk. Oh no. And he realized that something bad is about to happen. And she says, I'm a Jew, and this wicked Haman is trying to have me and my people killed. And the king was so angry, so outraged, he got up and he walked out of the room, I imagine, to go catch his breath and just breathe for a second. His right-hand man has done something that could mess the whole kingdom up. His own queen is about to be killed because of Haman. And so he goes out, and Haman begins begging her to do something to calm the king down. He realizes he's in all kinds of trouble, and he's begging her. And in this frantic moment, he's over here begging her, and he accidentally falls onto the bed that she's laying on. And then the king walks back in. And he is even more mad now, because now he says to himself, wait, now is he going to force himself on my wife in my own house? And he says, wait a minute. And as the words were coming out of his mouth, the servants jump over there and they grab Haman and they take him and they take the ring off of his finger and they go out and they drag him out and the king is sitting there. And one of the servants, because, they just had to share their piece, they said, hey, guess what? Haman built a giant gallows to kill Mordecai. And the king said, go hang him on that. Imagine the plot twist. Imagine what is going on here. In the end, Haman and even his sons were killed. But as we look at this, we got to remember there is still a problem. This decree had been put out, and this decree was set in stone, and it was going to happen. These people were going to kill the Jews. And so Esther Esther is trying to explain to the king what's going on, and the king says, listen, you guys do what you need to do. He goes out, and here's the other thing. He brings Mordecai in, and he places the ring of Haman on Mordecai's finger, and he says, you are now in charge. And he gives Mordecai the ability to address this situation. And with the king's seal, he's able to send out a decree saying that all the Jews were to stand together and could fight back in this situation. But in Esther chapter 9 and verse number 2, this is what it says. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hand on such as sought their hurt. And no man could withstand them, for fear of them fell upon all people. So everybody was terrified by the Jews. But get this, in verse number 3, and all the rulers of the province and the lieutenants and the deputies and the officers of the king helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai was greater and greater, and thus the Jews smote all of their enemies with the stroke of the sword. Everybody that came out against them, through all this, God has stepped up and taken care of them. But what happened? Mordecai was patient through it all. Through the captivity, he was patient. Through the struggles, he was patient. When Esther was taken, he was patient. When the decree went out, he was patient. He was waiting patiently on God. And I would encourage you, wait on God. I don't know what's going on in your life right now, but wait on God. And then this final thing that you could do is trust him in full surrender. See, because God provides salvation for those who will trust him in full surrender. Trust him. God provided the salvation for the Jews when they never saw it coming. God created a situation so that the Jews would be respected all of a sudden. They feared Mordecai. And King Ahasuerus sent out this decree at the very end of Esther. He sends out this decree throughout his entire kingdom stating the greatness of Mordecai and advanced Mordecai in the kingdom. And in Esther chapter 10, the last verse of the entire book of Esther, it says, "For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed." You see, he could have asked, God, why am I still stuck in Persia? Why can't I return home? Why did you let them take Esther? He could have had a falling out, but he chose to lean in. Mordecai trusted that God would take care of him. He trusted in God during the craziness, and God made all these things happen. Not only for Mordecai, but for the rest of the Jews. And so I would ask you, where are you leaning today? Where are you leaning? Think about your life. Where am I leaning right now? Are you leaning on your own ability to work things out? Now, let me ask you, how is that working for you? Lean in to God. See, salvation is not just spiritually for you, but even in the midst of a crazy world, God can be bringing deliverance into your life. But the key is to trust, and the key to trust is full surrender. Full surrender. We miss that sometimes. See, if you trust him, you don't need to work it out yourself. Sure, you pray. Sure, you work. Sure, you express your desires to him. But at the end of the day, you're okay with things not working out according to your plan because you know they're still working out according to his plan. Imagine the impact this could have on your family and those around you. The Bible tells us that after this all went down with Mordecai, that many people, many of the Persians became Jews because of Mordecai. It tells us that God used Mordecai to bless all the people of Israel and even the people in Persia. What if Mordecai gave up? What if he fell out? Your family could see the difference in you and want to experience that for themselves, but you got to display faithfulness through the craziness. Just like Erica pulled Lincoln in and said, don't fall out. God might be whispering in your ear saying, don't fall out. Don't fall out. Lean in. Lean in. If you're here today and you've never trusted in Jesus Christ as your Savior, man, I would beg of you. I would beg of you, lean in to a God who cares. Lean into grace. Lean in. Trust in him. Place your faith in him. See, salvation that we're talking about here and now, it's greater than and more important than any earthly, temporal salvation that you could experience from your circumstances. Your soul could be saved from an eternity separated from God in hell because of your sins. Because of my sins, I have been condemned to a place called hell, but Jesus came and paid the price. God defends his people, but God provides salvation for those who will trust in him. Will you trust in him today? Paul wrote that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus and shalt believe in thine heart that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. He said, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So will you trust him today? Will you call on him today? Lean